Darkly Splendid Abodes, the official podcast of Toronto Thelema, exploring, if you will, practical philosophy, from science and the workings of the mind to spirituality, esotericism, and magic. Stooping down, dipping my wings, I came into the darkly splendid abodes. In the system of Thelema, the Black Brotherhood and the left-hand path are technical terms with specific connotations, but it's not uncommon for people to run fast and loose with these terms, flinging them as insults at others, or making assumptions about their meaning. We'll dive into a chapter from Crowley's book, Magick Without Tears, to find clarification on the subject. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law, love under will.
Welcome to Season 3.
Oh man, I just can't get over the idea that we're on mic. Anytime you say anything that acknowledges that we're on mic, I start laughing like an obnoxious git. Like
You're the easiest audience I've ever had.
The first episode of every podcast always has a "let's cut that out" joke, right? Like it's like, or like
the old Dave Coulier.
They always try to explain, like, you know, you're going to hear this on Monday, but we're recording it on Friday. And I, you know, people get past that pretty quickly because it's just vulgar, and I can't. What have we been doing this for a year? And every time you say like.
Or has it been more than a year?
This is perverse. Get over it, Mike.
Easiest audience ever.
We wanted to talk about letter number. I'm hearing that in the Alan Coulter voice. Letter number 5. Letter number 5
from Daisy. She wants to know.
We wanted to talk about letter number 12 today from Aleister Crowley's Magick Without Tears, which is entitled The Left-Hand Path -- open quotes, The Black Brothers, close quotes. And I thought that I knew this material fairly well. And now that I've sat with it for 2 weeks, I think I was right. I don't think I had that many incorrect perceptions, although there's a few things that are new to me, which I was happy to have corrected. But on my first read, I was like, have I completely misunderstood what's going on? Because I found this letter very difficult, very, very difficult. I don't know why, because this is supposed to be like the beginner book stuff, but I think it's like the density of all the sub-references and how he tries to illustrate stuff by illusion and metaphor and it's very like, I had it laid out in brass tacks, and then I read, you know, what's on the page. And then I thought like, oh, I started moving my tacks all around. I took some pins out and put some pins back in. Anyway, how did you like this piece this time?
Yeah, I know what you mean, because it is one of those pieces that you probably, as an avid reader and a Thelemite, you're probably going to be reading this, you know, from time to time, like, you know, at least half a dozen times at the very least. And it does feel familiar, and yet, yeah, he does pack a lot of stuff in there. So it's another case of where it's such a great thing to be able to do these deep dips because we can overanalyze instead of just having, you know, reading over it and then moving on to the next letter.
Well, yeah, I mean, I kind of panicked the other day and I said, like, does he only ever say 2 things about this? And like, I sent you a text message being like, you know, kind of worried that I was missing the point entirely. And I think I've resolved to having some, you know, basic understanding of the point again. But yeah, I found actually the excerpts from 418 that are included in here, I found easier than the body of the letter itself.
Interesting.
So, I don't know. That's not usually the case. 418 is usually quite difficult.
I guess to lay things out for people who may not have actually read the stuff, read the stuff! and then get back to us. No, actually, you can listen along and then maybe read it after that and then come back to us. And hopefully that will be fun. But the layout of the letter is essentially addressing, what's the difference between the right-hand path and the left-hand path in Thelema?
That's right.
So this is very specific to Thelema. It's technical language, and the idea of the Black Brotherhood or the Black Brothers is technical language in Thelema that we're applying this. This idea of the abyss and the idea of the divergence between the left-hand and right-hand paths seems to take place specifically once 7 equals 4, the grade of 7 equals 4 has been attained completely, with all the buttons sewn on, as it puts it.
Yeah.
And then from there, the idea seems to be to destroy the entire universe in one fell swoop, which I have a hard time following exactly how that's... Like, it's pretty assumed from his tone that this is like part and parcel of this stage of the game here. And then he says, well, then how can you destroy it in one sole stupendous gesture? Listen to the vision and the voice. And then he gives a paragraph or so after that, but he does append those references. And I have a hard time, to be honest with you. If you had an easy time with this, wonderful. But I have...
Easier.
Yeah, I have an easy enough time following what it's laying out in terms of describing, the brothers of the right-hand path and the brothers of the left-hand path. But as far as how to destroy the universe in one sole stupendous gesture, I was having a hard time drawing a line from that statement to these visions, which would be great, and I'm happy to be corrected or pointed in the right direction or have everything elucidated in one fell swoop.
Here's the big question. The last sentence of paragraph 1, and for the pedants, I apologize. I haven't numbered the paragraphs nor made up arbitrary section headings this time, so you're just going to have to read along at home. Mm-hmm. But the last sentence of the first paragraph, at what point do they diverge? Meaning the right-hand path from the left hand. It's a sticky issue, right? And it seems to be a matter of attitude. Because he even says that the Black Brothers, in the end, still get to be little piles of dust in the city of the pyramids. They have this. They come to that inevitably because they're off balance, and they can't do work without going out from themselves. Somehow it's like they've restricted their concept of self, and they're trying to do work by reaching out and touching peripheral objects.
They seem to be grasping,
but they won't allow the peripheral objects in because they're worried about upsetting their sense of identity. And this sort of way of operating where you're trying to preserve is self-destructive way of operating. So they end up being little piles of dust in the city of the pyramids. And for them, that represents a failure because they failed to preserve the things they wanted to preserve. But for the masters of the temple, that's the condition of success. And so what is the difference which path you take? Because surely it's not a matter of if we think of this as like a metaphysical quasi-reality, if we're dealing with material principles and not just epistemological ones, like if there's a reality out there, there really is no God who's not controlling everything, and if you do the right thing for the wrong reasons, like you end up being a little pile of dust in the city of the pyramids, you've still achieved the goal, whether or not it was your goal. So, and he says the difference is that there's a little bit of blood in the Black Brothers' dust that pollutes the whole thing, and then he starts breeding scorpions. But like, what the hell does that mean? Right? And if the master of the temple is just a little pile of dust, how do they go on to do work, to tend the garden, to shed light, they don't offer guidance, direct guidance anymore the way that you do in the Lover's Triad. Once you become a master, your job is just to shed light. And what does that mean? Like, it's another layer of euphemism. And the reason that he's speaking of it all in euphemism is that what he actually means, to put a precise label on it, it's a subject that can only be understood, as you said, by a full Babe of the Abyss, a 7/4 with all the buttons sewn on. You're talking about very subtle material, and so we have to speak about it by allusion.
Yeah, he finishes his letter just before going into those passages from 418 with something very on the nose for what you're saying there, which is, he says, "It makes it only all the worse when one has become so habituated by neshamic ideas to knowing, even before one says it, that what one is going to say is of necessity untrue. As untrue as it is contradictory. So what can it possibly matter what one says? Such doubts are dampers. Enough of because be he damned for a dog." And then he moves on. With the idea in mind that this is a difficult subject even for Crowley to elucidate, and he expresses a couple of times in this letter the concern whether or not he's actually overlooking some important detail. Just commenting on this from our point of view, it does strike me that this idea of like the Black Brothers would be that idea of like keeping a hold of that idea of self and other, so that you're trying to maintain the self, the individual self, and hold off the other. And that seems to me a very, what we tend to call an old aeon perspective, something that would have fit right in with the Christian sort of mentality about things, with this idea of good and evil and us versus them and this kind of thing. Whereas the Thelemic ideal becomes one of complete inclusion of all aspects of the universe.
Yeah, that's right. That's important. Let's go back to the beginning here, and we'll just start going through the letter from the top. It is the introduction of the word self that has raised such prickly questions. It's really a little bewildering. The signpost right-hand path, left-hand path seem rather undecipherable. And then, for such a long way, they look exactly alike. At what point do they diverge? And of course, they diverge at the grade of 7/4 when you're becoming a master of the temple. You've become an initiate of the AA, and you've done your 110 work, which is to master the astral plane, your 2-9 work, which is to get some preliminary attainments in yoga, your 3-8 work, which is to memorize all the tables of 777, your 4-7 work, which is to start worshiping deities, and then your 5-6 work, which is to attain the knowledge and conversation of your own holy guardian angel, realize your true will, and become sort of an adept of the system. Then you have Adeptus Minor, Adeptus Major, Adeptus Exemptus. This is a lifetime of effort, more than a lifetime for most people. But sooner or later, you come up against the abyss, which, if you want to think of it epistemologically speaking, there's your ideas and everything you think you are, and then there's the mysterious source of inspiration. Like, where did those ideas come from? And you're blind to, what that is. And so when you come up to the abyss and get to the point of trying to let the love of Babylon carry you across, into the supernal realm so that you can begin to address these questions of where inspiration comes from. This is the point where the two paths diverge, left-hand path versus right-hand path. And unfortunately, we don't have the context of this because we don't have Dear Sister's letters. All these letters are addressed, of course, in Magick Without Tears to a woman named Dear Sister. There may be more than one woman but we only have Crowley's half of the correspondence, and we've only assigned ourselves this one letter, so we don't know if he's mentioned self in letter number 12, letter number 11. But the question that makes the difference between right and left-hand path is the question of the aspirant's definition of selfhood, and what it means to be yourself in relationship to coming up to the abyss and looking across into this blind, empty, dark, non-existent sort of epistemological territory, which we assume is actually metaphysical territory, but it helps to understand it to think of it from a epistemological perspective, because everybody's had the experience of groping for a word they know and not being able to reach it.
Yeah.
And then where does it come from when you finally remember? We can imagine it comes from across the abyss.
Well, you mentioned the aspirant's conception of self, the way that they understand the idea of the self. That seems really important, because this seems to be obviously one of the crises of the adept, the path of the adept, where in this case it seems to be, that your conception of the self is shaken to its core. Mm-hmm. Now, the conception of the self for the aspirant is not necessarily correct, and that may very well be at the crux of this thing, where they want to grasp onto the idea, they can't let it go.
Yeah. So by the time you've by the time you've attained knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, that puts you in some kind of relationship with some kind of a god, right? Mm-hmm. And so you have a kind of ultimate reference point from which to perceive yourself and to be in context with the whole world. It's not just me versus the ideas of this book that I'm reading, or me versus my who I thought I would be when I was a kid, but you get to be in reference to, what does it say in Liber Samach, myself made perfect. Mm-hmm. So you have a very full
Asarun Nefer.
You have a very full understanding of the self not self duality, which you continue to refine by becoming an Adeptus Major and an Exemptus. And so by the time, as you're saying, by the time you get to the point of crossing the abyss, that understanding of the self should be very, very full and very complete. If we remember in one of the readings we did in the first season, I think it was the book about light, life, love, and liberty, maybe book 150, is that what it's called? Liber Libellum. He says that there was that sophisticated view of self, not self, dualism, that accepted the idea that there might be things in the universe you didn't understand, mm-hmm. And that there were other selves with other universes, other microcosms and other macrocosms, and that your world would be distinct from other worlds until your understanding of the universe was very complete. And he says in here, until a man's understanding of the universe is complete. I can't find the quotation right now, but as we work through, we will find it. Then they'll only be a partial microcosm. Mm-hmm. So the man who comes up to the edge of the abyss has to have completed that microcosm, and then be ready to give up everything, including their adepthood, and let themselves drift across.
Yeah, and he also makes reference to the idea of, weighing it against it in the sense that it's not correct to think of Atma Darshana or even Shiva Darshana as being the Hindu equivalents or the Buddhist equivalents of the crossing of the abyss. But he does make reference to them. So Atma Darshana, Crowley's conception of that trance is the perception. It's basically the vision of Pan. It's the vision of the universe as a whole without limitation.
This is exactly what I was looking for. Unless your universe is perfect, there's the reference back to Liber 150, and perfection includes the idea of balance. how can you ever come to Atma Darshana? The Hindus may maintain that Atma Darshana, or at any rate Shiva Darshana, is the equivalent of crossing the abyss. Beware any such conclusions. The trances are simply isolated experiences sharply cut off from normal thought life. To cross the abyss is a permanent and fundamental revolution in the whole of one's being. And so now I think that Vedic practitioners, other yogis, will say that these trances actually do leave a lasting impression on you. But this is one of the important misunderstandings that I was laboring under, right? It's somewhere, I think it's in the even in the AA syllabus, the second half, he says that one of the titles of the master of the temple is the master of samadhi. Mm-hmm. And so I took it to mean that you should be able to make samadhi on any object for any, length of time, whenever you need to. And so getting to that, either that no mind place or that place of complete identification, disillusion into an object, that really feels powerfully, like at least from like I said, an epistemological standpoint, the standpoint of a theory of mind, that feels like getting across, right? Because you don't have a conception of you anymore. You've dissolved into something larger. So that really feels like it. But if you look at what happens to Crowley in The Vision and the Voice with his encounter with the demon sea, it's the silence is the solution to the problem, but you still have to have the encounter, and it's quite explicit here in this text that you need to have that conversation with the demon in order to be crossing. So there's a necessarily magical operation going on. It's not just a yoga of no self or a Buddhist nibbana or something. It really has to be a battle between you and your false knowledge of the whole world or something. That's a little bit of an educated guess, or a little bit of, like we say, a wrong way of talking about it, but Crowley's saying there are no right ways, but this has to include a magical operation. It's not just deep meditation.
Yeah, it's worth noting that the demon sea, as you say, the way that it's described and the way that Crowley describes it, and that it's described in 418, is as this disembodied noise or information or sea of information and that sort of thing, but without a center to it. So and it's trying to formulate a center. It's trying to, and you can see using that in this case, you could kind of imagine how that's battling that desperate attempt at creating a center, like an ego within it, is what's battling the aspirant who's trying to move through the abyss.
For Karanzan is, as it were, the shell or excrement of these three paths. I assume Kether, Chokmah, Bina, maybe the three supernals, but I'm not sure. For Karanzan is, as it were, the shells or excrement of these three paths, and therefore is his head raised unto Da'ath, knowledge, the false sphere of knowledge. And therefore have the Black Brothers declared him to be the child of wisdom and understanding, but who is but the bastard of the svastika. And this is that which is written of in the Holy Kabbalah concerning the whirlpool and the Leviathan and the great stone. So our Kabbalistic doctrine is that each of these emanations of the divine, the 10 Sephiroth that make up the tree of life, have a stagnation beneath them and behind them, a false. There's a false tree called the Qlifoth, and where the shells of the dead.
And where all the edgelords go.
Sure. Okay. Shots fired, I guess. Not sure at whom. But leave your list of enemies on my desk in the morning. But so Karanzan is going to be, the demon sea is going to be the shells of sort of the supernal of the shells. Those three, the dead parts of those most top three emanations, and then he pops up in the fallen or false Sephira that is called Doth, which is sort of the turbulence of the abyss as you're trying to cross. The bumps you come up against are, again, let's speak of it epistemologically. You're trying to meditate, you're trying to get to know mind. Thoughts keep coming up, and they seem important. Maybe sometimes, maybe you get a quote-unquote insight about the nature of the divine. But if what you're trying to do is become a red triangle, insights into the nature of the divine don't help. And so this demon, in one very low conception, is the entity that sends these breaks out at you that leave you chasing threads, and you can read this very vividly in 418. Crowley chasing the threads of argument that Choronzon is spitting out at him, and then trying each time to either trap the demon in a logical fallacy that deteriorates the whole thread of argument and gets him back to a no mind sort of center place.
Yeah, the one image in 418 that really stands out constantly to my mind is the other where he is seeing the voice coming from the throne, and it's just like this wind that's constantly talking and talking and talking, and that's like pretty much on the nose, and that's exactly what he's experiencing, and Victor Newberg was experiencing when they were in the desert and evoked Choronzon into Crowley.
So what's important about this? Mark well the first distinction. The black magician or sorcerer is hardly even a distant cousin of the Black Brother. It is the difference between a sneak thief and Hitler. The difference between a sneak thief and Hitler is not too bad an analogy. The sorcerer may be, indeed he usually is, a thwarted or disappointed man whose aims are perfectly natural. Often enough, his real trouble is ignorance, and by the time he has become fairly hot stuff as a black magician, he has learnt that he is getting nowhere and finds himself, despite himself, on the true path of the wise. Reading these paragraphs because they make me feel uncomfortably seen. and because I don't know if it's still fashionable, but it used to be fashionable for Thelemites to hurl the epithet of Black Brother at each other. If someone was being a troll on the internet, that guy's just, he comes from dispersion. He's an agent of Choronzon, which sometimes it feels like they are, if not intentionally. But the point is that it's actually, most people, haven't finished their neophyte. Most people have never approached the AA.
Yeah.
So to say that someone has, failed in their attempt to cross the abyss is not really a profound insult. That's like saying someone, failed in their bid to become prime minister.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, what did you come in third?
You get vice president.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. It's like, so there's important distinctions that at some point will be brought out here between the Black School of Magic, which those people are our allies, and their end goal at least, is the same as ours. Their metaphysics is different, and their epistemological approach is different, but they're still aiming for, the supreme attainment between, just like a Satanist, is another category, what Crowley calls a black magician or a sorcerer, who's just a disappointed man who's trying their best to use magic to sort of maybe paper over some errors in there or some holes in their life. And then the Black Brother, who's this person who's attempted this very supreme attainment, and in so doing has polluted themselves very profoundly by just not quite being ready for it, or maybe Crowley speculates being the wrong type of person. Maybe the evil was so inborn that they...
Yeah, maybe it came so early on in the career that,
and then the third reason to read this is that here's an open condemnation of Adolf Hitler. We talked about it in our talkback episode about how, in Magick Without Tears, Crowley was going to Hitler and the National Socialist sort of ideology fairly easily and saying like, oh yeah, you can think of an adept of Thelema as sort of like a member of the master race, except that he just like doesn't have to come from any particular race. And so that's can be troubling, and I think that the flirtation of many figures during the 1940s with National Socialist ideas really is troubling, and we're allowed to be troubled about it.
Well, he actually has that line here: the about-to-be Black Brother constantly restricts himself. He is satisfied with a very limited ideal. He is afraid of losing his individuality. Reminds one of that Nordic twaddle about race pollution.
Yeah. Good. So, if I'm open to talking about how Crowley can be a bad dude sometimes, and how I'm often worried about him when he tries to come down deliberately on the right side of history, we should also acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. So he's, and I think this is all really about his relationship with Martha Kunzel, who was a devoted fan of both Adolf Hitler and Aleister Crowley, and was responsible for commissioning very many of the translations of Thelemic work into German. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that's sort of a footnote.
On the note of, if you don't mind, a slight tangent, and then we can come back to this thought. Mm-hmm. I just like to hit that note that the idea of the abyss, the crossing of the abyss, the Black Brothers, and accusing people of being Black Brothers and that sort of thing, that is, it is worth kind of bringing that up as being hyperbole, and people jumping to that way too easily, just as a matter of course. So I had sent you like some quotes from Germer letters to Jane Wolfe that were pertinent to that subject, and I thought maybe I'd read one or two of them.
Oh, please, because there's one of them, at least one of them that I remember that's really fun.
Yeah. So the first one, I'm not sure if I sent this one to you, but it was basically, I don't know what the oath of the abyss really means, says Karl Germer to Jane Wolfe in a letter. Though I have heard the term frequently, if this abyss refers to the crossing between 7.4 and 8.3, then I believe Monsieur Wilford T. Smith is less inspired by his HGA than by vanity, ambition, etc. of his evil persona. And again, in another, he's got, ever since I have been with the 93ers, I have heard a lot about the quote-unquote abyss. I have, from whatever I have read about it in the books, placed this crossing of the abyss in between the 7.4 and 8.3. And from the way the thing is actually used, it seems to be somewhere else, say lower down on the tree. It seems to be like this American tendency to apply words with definite meaning to something much more, and then there's just a little note that says illegible. For instance, you say high school for something which in Germany would be a very low kind of a school. This different organization of the American brain in the use of words may account for you and Leah using abyss so often for commonplace things. So yeah, that's kind of on the nose,
One of the reasons, there's a couple of reasons that I avoid saying the name Choronzon, although I'll say it here because we're quoting text and it would be confusing to dance around it. But the first thing is that I think I'm trying to artificially imbue it with a bit of power for myself. Like, I'm trying to become a theist. I'm trying to believe in magic. Even when I have experiences that seem spooky at the time, my instinct is to try to rationalize them and ignore them and whatever. So
you're Scully.
To allow myself, yeah, I'm Scully to your Mulder. Sorry, my hair isn't cuter today. But
sorry, mine is.
Duchovny always looks good.
He does. Yeah,
you're allowed to be a good-looking Duchovny. But then another reason is that I've been having for a while now very deep experiences of what I'll call pratyahara, which is sort of like a deep silence, and I realize that I'm I'm nowhere near where I need to be on the path of the return to, even approach my HGA necessarily, never mind think about crossing the abyss. So I don't want to kind of like evoke some cousin of this experience by calling the dragon by name too many times, because I don't want to. I'm approaching my neophyte grade, and I don't want to approach the abyss as a neophyte, because that's famously a bad idea. But yeah. So I'm super guilty, I guess, is what I'm saying, of doing what Grant is saying here. Just because you have one or two dhyana experiences, or like even just like a reliable pratyahara, you think you're looking into the abyss. You fucking child.
Yeah, I'm sure that whole California group at the time was probably banding about the term Black Brother for everybody who displeased them and whatnot.
Oh, sure, because there was so much schisming and stuff.
Yeah.
The left-hand path is a totally different matter. Let's start at the beginning. You must remember my saying that only two operations were possible in nature: addition and subtraction. Let us apply this to the magical progress. What happens when the aspirant invokes Dhyana or calls up Lilith? He increases the sum of his experience in these particular ways. Sometimes he has a liaison experience, which links two main lines of thought, and so is worth dozens of isolated gains. Now, is there any difference at all between the white and the black adept in similar cases? It is that one, working by love under will, achieves a marriage with the new idea, while the other, merely grabbing, adds a concubine to his harem of slaves. And so, here again, we're working by analogy, almost by accident, because he's being quite literal. He's talking about like doing an Astarte working, where you pick a god and write a little ritual, write some adorations, and then practice that several times a day for several weeks or something, to try and build your relationship with that god. And he's saying the healthy thing is to come into relationship with that god. And, you have influence on the deity has influence on you, and you change by being in that relationship. Somebody said to me once, the idea is not to microdose LSD. The idea is to take a whole lot of LSD all at once, and it changes you forever. And I said, well, like, that's kind of scary. Like, why would you want to be changed forever? And he says, well, do you like who you are? Like, why are you doing this if you already like who you are? Like, what's the point of doing of spiritual practice if you don't want to be changed by it? So this is the kind of thinking that Crowley's pointing at here. Whereas the Black Brother doesn't want to be changed by it. The Black Brother wants the god to become his agent or something. So maybe he does mean it literally. Maybe harem of slaves. Maybe he just wants a demon to go on fetch quests for him. But it
becomes a bit of a power struggle, and I can't help, I'm afraid, ironically, to get into talking about it like this idea that there's fear at the back of this, but I can't help finding that feels like the inevitable conclusion. Like there's a fear that is causing the Black Brother to want to dominate the other or to shirk the other.
You and I are on the same wavelength. About 3 times in here, he'll nod to the passage from the Book of the Law that says the word of sin is restriction. And it's not just Crowley doing that. It's also the 418 spirits, the Enochian angels saying, who hath not understood restriction or hath not understood the word of sin. But I'm much, much more inclined, as I'm reading this, to be thinking about fear as failure and the forerunner of failure. We were long ago, you and Edward had that conversation on here about anger,
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned on the cast before, about people who think there are negative and positive emotions, or even negative and positive behaviors, like people just do things and then there are consequences, and I much prefer to think of it in terms of preferred versus not preferred versus negative and positive, right?
Yeah.
But like if you're scared of your own anger or something like that, like this is a part of yourself that won't get destroyed when you cross the abyss, that you won't be able to look at, that won't have a reflection in your universe, and may become, that little drop of blood that that pollutes your attainment,
Yeah.
Obviously we're speculating because neither of us has all our buttons sewn on. Two of my buttons fell off on the way here. So I've been on the subway with open trousers, which is not, I don't mean anything by it. But anyway, Jesus Christ.
But yeah, that I do want to point out, going back, that paragraph where he mentions, I really like that line where he says, somebody who's, where do I start this? Well, basically, he increases the sum of his experiences in these particular ways, invoking Deanna or Lilith. And Crowley says, sometimes he has a liaison experience, which links two main lines of thought and is worth dozens of isolated games. And I wish I could put into words exactly how just that, what an aha moment that is. But I don't know if this will actually do it or not, but like the image that I can maybe try to evoke it with is if you were trying to reveal a painting, like a big mural, and with all kinds of stuff going on it, but you can't see any of it, and all you can do is wipe off a little portion of it and then guess based on that what else might be available, and then maybe wipe off a little different portion over here. And it's no guarantee that just because you have a few spots wiped off that it's actually going to give you a really clear idea of what the whole mural looks like. But maybe when you start connecting a couple of them up and you get some clarity that way, then it's like that can create this aha kind of moment of that much closer, getting that much closer to the full picture.
You had an aha moment about aha. You're like, oh, that's what an aha moment is.
Oh, you're right. Aha!
That's terrific. Yeah, no, you're right to point that out. And for more on this, people can once again apply to our previous episode on Liber 150. But it's great to see some of these threads connecting in subtler ways.
Yeah.
Because in recent episodes, a lot of the readings that we've been doing have either felt almost the same or been very subtle elaborations of previous concepts, and that's been helpful. But to see that this is different, reading this is different when you've fairly freshly read that.
Yeah. Yeah, I gotta say, it's really nice being back to some good old Crowley rather than, well, basically being off the Echad. Just because of the difficulty of the lack of a center there.
You made a 12-step joke earlier, but back off the Echad sounds like sounds like you're happy about renewing your commitment to your 12-step program. Yeah, but of course I'm thinking about him all through this, right? I mean, and there's some stuff in
the Vishnu in the room.
There's some stuff about Vishnu, Ganesha.
The Ganesha. My mistake. The Ganesha.
The Vishnu in the room is somebody else. I think that's Jesus.
What was it? Jesus Stanfeld Christ.
Oh my God. There's something in here like about how the reason the path of Bith is superior on the tree to the Sephira of Binah is to confound the Black Brother. So that he fails to create a second crown. Because if he succeeded to create a second crown, it would destroy the tree. Mm-hmm. And like, that's almost prophetic, isn't it? Like, Akkad builds himself a second crown and then spends the rest of his career rebuilding the tree.
Wow, yeah. Pretty on the nose.
Anyway, I don't want to keep talking about Akkad, and I don't want to keep hammering, because there may be Akkad people listening, and I'm just, maybe he had a wonderful abyss crossing experience. I won't know until I see the diaries.
Well, yeah, we can vent if we like. We can vent if we want to. We
friends don't vent.
And if they don't vent, they're
no friends of mine.
Yeah, no, don't take anything too personally, oh gentle listener.
Yeah, you're
Stay
not
with us
him.
here. Yeah, well, you're not him. And also, I don't know, I can't speak for Michael, but I still do find Akkad's stuff of value. It's just, you got to be able to, you got to sort the wheat from the chaff.
I think I'm just raw about it because we have to do more.
Yeah.
I don't know when we have to do more, but at some point we have to do the Master of the Temple Diaries, and at some point it would be we promised about 4 times to do Anatomy of the Body of God, and like there's a right way to approach it that it deserves, and I even if we don't do that for 7 years, I'm still mad we're gonna have to do it.
The subject of Charles Stanfield Jones comes up frequently in the Germer letters as well, as one of the examples. Him and Norman Mudd, were, and I guess Leia as well, but particularly Jones, because of the fact that he's an example of having, read too much into the Book of the Law and taken it too much to heart, being, one of the personae in the Book of the Law, and apparently Leia and Mudd both kind of did that as well, with all the reason in the world. And in fact, the whole Cefalù period, Germer is referring to as being an experiment that Crowley had learned a lot from. And it sounds like, going back to the idea of that short comment that's tagged onto the end of the Book of the Law, warning against the study of the book and whatnot. I think that was all very much in reaction to a lot of these people who let it go to their heads.
That's interesting.
But back to the material at hand.
Was that all you wanted to say? Just that it's nice not to be doing Akkad? You were in the middle of a thought, and I feel like I cut you off.
Yeah. Let me regroup here for a moment. But no, I think it is pertinent to refer to Akkad, considering the material here, because there's, whatever you think of Akkad, we are trying to understand what constitutes a Black Brother, what constitutes the left-hand path, and that might be very illustrative, because Crowley specifically says here that the two paths look identical. He didn't say similar, he says identical up until a certain point.
That's right.
And that point is at this very stage of the game.
Yeah, you have to get there. You have to get there before you can attempt to cross. And the failure of the Black Brother is the failure of his attempt to cross. So all there's only one roadmap. That's the unique thing about our Aeon, is that we have curriculum all the way up to 8.3.
Yeah.
In previous centuries, curriculum only went up to 5.6, and then you had to be martyred. So we have curriculum, and we don't have to martyr ourselves.
Yeah.
Here we are. If there's any difference between the White Adept and the Black Adept in a similar case, it is that one, working by love under will, achieves marriage with the new idea, while the other, merely grabbing, adds a concubine to his harem of slaves. And I just realized that might be literal. Maybe he doesn't allow his magical operations to change him to be transformative experiences. Maybe he's like a medieval sorcerer sending demons on fetch quests. But I don't think that can be it. I think this also has to be, if it's literal, that's great, because it's nice to have something literal in a text that's all presented by euphemism. But I think it also has to be euphemistic, because there has to be some way in which he has to be restricted kind of in all of his activities, right? I mean, most of what we do, even if we're very dedicated magicians, is not Astarte. most of what we do is day-to-day life, and there must be some way in which this type of restriction is a matter of course, I think, for him.
Yeah, especially if this is an experience, this crossing of the abyss, that is, how does he put it, fundamentally changes a person, right? Like, I mean, whether you're on the right-hand path or the left-hand path, presumably it's changing you fundamentally and not simply giving you a mere trance. So,
Well, that's an interesting idea. I thought that maybe the problem with the left-hand path is that the practitioner didn't allow themselves to be changed. But then what would be the difference? You might as well have never attempted the crossing in the first place. To attempt the crossing and fail must be something significant. So you're right. Maybe he's changed in both cases. And it carries on from what I just read. You've already read this. The about-to-be Black Brother constantly restricts himself. He is satisfied with a very limited ideal. He is afraid of losing his individuality. And there's the fear of failure, you know, because we're going to talk about the abyss crossing experience of being a very desolatory, to coin, to add suffixes where they needn't be.
not desultory.
Desultory experience. The individual sort of has to allow themselves to dissolve. And so if you're afraid of losing your individuality, then that's the core of the restriction. That's the sin that prevents you from doing the crossing.
And he's saying the about-to-be Black Brother. So, like you say, so it would appear that this is it's almost like, you're going, here we come, we're coming through the doors, and oh fuck, I didn't sign up for that. You try to back out of it.
It's that's explicitly what's discussed very shortly.
But
in such cases, the man's policy is, of course, to break off all relationship with the supernal triad, to replace it by inventing a false crown, da'ath. To them, knowledge will be everything.
That sounds familiar.
And what is knowledge but the very soul of illusion? I hope people are getting these pretty basic Kabbalistic terms we're throwing out there. You have to stick to the text, or it's just going to be a disaster.
You know, we got so used to having to explain every goddamn term that we came across that you're right. It's almost like I'm just taking it as a matter of course that people are following here. But you know what? That's probably for the best.
Yeah, because I think there's enough that one can get out of this without knowing what certain buzzwords mean, and then whether it's listening to us again or hopefully actually reading it, you know, and then reading it again and then reading it again over the course of a career of several years. You'll get deeper into it as you learn more of these words, but we can't get very deep into a piece like this if we have to do a beginner level discussion about everything it's referencing. I mean, I tried to do a little bit of a sketch of the career of the AA magician, which is probably going to be exhausting and infuriating for anyone who already is a member of the AA, and I may get accused of having a superficial read, but I was trying to get through it fast.
It was a superficial
rundown. What the hell? Yeah, so is afraid of losing his individuality. So this is very profound. And then in such cases, the man's policy is of course to break off all relations with the supernal triad and replace it by inventing a false crown, da'ath, the sephira of knowledge. To them, knowledge will be everything. And what is knowledge but the very soul of illusion? So again, thinking about it from the perspective of epistemology, from the perspective of like a theory of mind, what you want to do is you want to get up into the place of silent inspiration. You don't want to explain the process of becoming inspired, because that process is, because it's a non-linguistic process, you can't apply language to it. So you're just going to end up writing the phenomenology of spirit, which there's it's Hegel's important to Crowley, but he never suggests you should read him. You should read him, but I haven't. But there's more going on than our phenomenology. It's not just qualia, not just what it's like to be, but like Hegel sort of says, beingness, right? And so you're trying to get up, how does he call it? Primeval. You're trying to get up to something primeval.
And this goes back to the idea of the aspirant's conception of themselves, of what the self is. Because if all of your conceptions of yourself are based on the way that your mind works, and you're trying to transcend the mind, then that's not an easy thing to do, and you're going to have to let go of all the stuff that you equate, or that you equate to reality, essentially.
Yeah. And so, yeah, good. You have to, that's right.
And he says, refusing thus the true nourishment of all his faculties, they lose their structural unity and must be fortified by continuous doses of dope in anguished self-preservation. Thus all its chemical equations become endothermic.
Earlier he says there's only two operations possible in nature, addition and subtraction. What does he mean? The basis of chemical processes, you can either, mix two chemicals together to try to create a third one, or you can break down chemical bonds to try to create elements, anabolic and catabolic reactions. There's only two kinds of reactions. And all of our physiological processes in our body are, either anabolic or catabolic. We're either building tissues or, breaking down viruses or something, let's say, breaking down bacteria, or, recycling old blood cells. And here, endothermic versus exothermic, many chemical reactions release heat. Like if you mix vinegar and baking soda to, make your toy volcano explode, it gets quite hot. Because when you break those chemical bonds, you release heat. Some reactions need a catalyst, whether you add water or you add fire to warm up the chemicals. So an endothermic reaction is one where the heat comes in from the outside. And very importantly, every living body, because the way our muscles work, they generate a lot of heat when they're used, because they break down adenine triphosphate into adenine diphosphate, and it releases energy, releases heat. So the Black Brother is a person who's incapable of making their own heat. They need to bring energy in from outside in order to operate. But also because they fear losing the cells, they don't let any, the heat that they bring in, they want to kind of use it to keep operating, but they don't let it affect them. Dope in this period means the same thing it means now. It means heroin or other drugs. So the kind of work that the Black Brother is doing to, say, coordinate their understanding instead of tend the garden, it becomes obsessive. It becomes a self-destructive addiction, and again, it's difficult to know what these analogies are pointing at, but you can sort of imagine maybe like someone having a schizophrenic episode, or a paranoid episode. They seem to be getting all of their nourishment from fixating on the idea that the TV is talking to them. or because every phenomenon is a particular dealing of God with my soul. So Rick and Morty are talking straight to me, or something like this. And again, I kind of want to get all of our interpretation from the paper, but when the paper is doing stuff by analogy, you kind of have to guess what the analogies are for.
Yeah, and Crowley likes to make chemical analogies, incidentally, because he, as a child, was super into chemicals and chemistry and whatnot, and he blew himself up once.
Oh, I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
No.
he I forget exactly what it was, but he was basically created essentially what turned out to be a bomb in a sand pit, and blew himself to kingdom come, and was on the verge of death for a little while. I think he was probably about 12.
That's amazing. Anything to say about that? This idea about breaking off relationship, refusing to nourish the faculties? Refusing the true nourishment of the faculties.
Yeah, it seems almost as if by this attempting to hold off the other, one therefore becomes addicted to the means of energy intake, in a sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's really weird, actually, when you think about it, because if we're talking about, if in our analogy, we're talking about the supernals as being the place where inspiration comes from, and you're cutting off your relationship with true nourishment. You're cutting off inspiration, and just dwelling on let's say you're, like we said, schizophrenia. Let's say your mental illness. You're just dwelling on those things that already fixate you, like revising and re-revising the Tree of Life, or watching and rewatching Twin Peaks, which was my problem, or whatever other petty obsession you can.
I didn't know you were a Black Brother who was lost to the abyss.
The show is evil. The show is designed.
It radiates evil.
Yeah. It doesn't radiate. It is. Anyway, great program. Pure evil.
Pure evil. I don't know if there's any Ministry fans out there.
There definitely are. If you're not wearing a Metallica t-shirt right now, you get to take a shot.
There's a whole lot of sober people listening. Incidentally, I'm wearing a Dawn of the Dead t-shirt at the moment.
Yeah, we were talking about Romero on the way here,
yeah,
so I'm,
did
guilty.
A study group by his gravesite the other day.
So he's obsessing over refining the things he already thinks he knows, because he won't let himself go into the area of pure inspiration. But it also says that all his chemical equations become endothermic. Oh, shoot. Yeah, okay, never mind. There's no contradiction. Endo is inside. So endothermic means the heat is all self-contained. He doesn't need to draw heat from outside. So forgive me, I'm on summer break for my studies. So yeah, endothermic.
Which reminds me of something, I can't remember where that's stated. Probably in 418 at some point, but I can't nail it down in my mind. But basically, I'm picturing one of the Black Brothers as being himself like a pyramid, but that is gradually, slowly releasing energy until eventually he will be nothing but a piece of dust and then evaporate entirely.
Yeah. I'm sure stuff like that is in here soon.
But yeah, the Crowley's example of the opposite by way of contrast is every accretion must modify me. I want it to do so. I want to assimilate it absolutely. I want to make it a permanent feature of my temple. I am not afraid of losing myself to it, if only because it also is modified by myself in the act of union. I'm not afraid of its being the wrong thing, because every experience is a play of Nuit, and the worst that can happen is a temporary loss of balance, which is instantly adjusted as soon as it is noticed, by recalling and putting into action the formula of contradiction.
So let's clearly state the confusion before we add the last element. The last element, I think, is balance. But I'm confused, and I want to clearly state the confusion. So the master of the temple is a person who has refined all their own elements to such a point where they become perfect microcosms of the perfect universe, and then in Cross of the Abyss have dissolved, into they've destroyed both themselves and the universe, and all that remains is a little pile of dust in the city of the pyramids. So, like we talked about, the formula of martyrdom. They don't exist. Their world doesn't exist because they're dead. The Black Brother is afraid to do that and tries to cross the abyss and fails, ties up a little pile of blood, a little drop of blood, which means that ultimately he rots on the inside. But it says here, he must become a little pile of dust. This is exactly that which he most dreads, and it is that which must, in the end, come, because there is no compensating element in his idea of structure. I don't know what that means. A compensating element is an idea of, maybe we can talk through it. But so the Black Brother does not destroy himself. He's a little pile of dust in the city of the pyramids, but there's a drop of blood. It's polluting everything, and he's making scorpions or something, it says later. But the master of the temple, also, that self-destruction was temporary because they aren't martyred. They get to come out of their vision on the other side, permanently transformed, and they tend a garden, or they, give off light. So it seems like the thing that would be the difference, one person dissolves into nirvana and the other person becomes an immortal lich wandering the earth. There is no dissolving into nibbana for the Thelemite. The Thelemite stays and teaches, becomes what's the word? The Buddha of compassion. What are they called?
The Bodhisattva?
The Thelemite always becomes a bodhisattva. They don't make a choice. The master of the temple is a bodhisattva. And so, I really don't understand the difference.
There is one thing that comes up in here that it's almost like both things are happening simultaneously. Because... okay, I'm going to say it in just simple terms. That I don't think this will be correct, but I'll just sort of say it this way for ease of expression. The master of the temple becomes a little pile of dust. Meanwhile, there's also that part of him that is cast out into the sphere of Jupiter, as it says in Liber 418, and Crowley posited that perhaps it depended on the particular adept, because Ahad seemed to be cast out into Malkuth.
Right.
So maybe different adepts will be cast out into different spheres. But this cast out element picks up the skandhas, the sankaras. I'm trying to think of the right Buddhist term, but basically the habituated patterns of the adept and carries them out in the world. And I wonder if that is essentially the manifestation of that hermit.
And so the Black Brother left-hand path would presumably be cast out into Da'ath, which is a non-existent sphere. Say that that's the supernal triad, try to wear it as a crown, and then destroy the whole tree.
Yeah, I'm
then to destroy
not a master of the temple. In fact, I'm an ipsissimus.
But then to destroy the whole tree is just like, it just seems like another euphemism for crossing the abyss. So can we talk about this one word at a time? There is no compensating element in his idea of structure. So what's a compensating element? A compensating element is like a feature that corrects. It's on the opposite side of whatever the principle being analyzed is.
Yeah. Now, Crowley mentions this idea of the formula of contradiction being the means of attaining balance. So when you're trying to hold yourself apart from parts of the universe, then you never get to the final formula of zero.
He doesn't have a not self.
Yeah. Well, he has nothing but not self all around him, and he's trying to keep away from it. Maybe that's a better way of thinking of it.
Yeah, so he's okay. Yeah. I mean, just this idea of, superficially speaking, this idea of one is afraid and the other isn't, and one is restricted and the other is destroyed. You know, like I know the difference between a bodhisattva and a vampire. But when we're approaching it by analogy with this kind of like, for the signpost left-hand path, right-hand path seems rather indecipherable, and then for such a long way they look exactly alike. It's actually quite profound. Even the crossing experiences, it's not just that one tries and fails. It's that there is a crossing experience, but it's perverse. And in what way it's perverse, I'm trying not to think of Akkad all the time, because I don't even know if Akkad, I'm just pretending that Akkad's a Black Brother because it tickles me. But Crowley thought he was a master of the temple. So even though in some of these places it looks like he's talking about Akkad explicitly, he never denies that attainment. So he can't be, You
know what? A lot of the way that Crowley talks about this subject, I mean, he does sound authoritative. I'm not gonna downplay that, but it does seem to me like he's trying to grapple with it himself. He's trying to understand himself what this is, what this subject is, what a Black Brother is, what the left-hand path constitutes. Attempting to understand and grapple with this subject himself.
So do you think that's what he means when he starts talking about how important balance is? Like, it's not just that you have to be a microcosm of the universe. The universe necessarily includes the idea of balance. And that balance is a key feature of what's lacking in the crossing experience of the Black Brother, that is the sort of atrophy that ends up destroying them.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, it can't be said enough that the whole idea of the Thelemic path includes everything in the universe. You are becoming identical to the universe. And to exclude anything from the universe because you don't like it, or you don't want it, or you're trying to keep something to yourself is problematic. And like you say, it's like somebody who becomes a Black Brother isn't consciously becoming a Black Brother. We get like the idea that somebody's saying, you know what, I'm going to specifically go against the grain and I want to explore this left-hand path specifically. And it's like, no, that's not exactly what we're talking about here. This is something that seems to happen in spite of the person. But that's even hard to tell, It's hard to be 100% explicit about that, to be honest.
Here's what it's like to be in the abyss, maybe. The egg of the serpent is a basilisk egg, and the gates of understanding are 50. That is the sign of the scorpion. The pillars about the neophyte are crowned with flame. The vault of the adept is lighted by a rose. In the abyss is the eye of the hawk. But upon the great sea shall the master of the temple find neither star nor moon. He's saying that in the neophyte temple there's fire, in the adept temple there's a rose, and in the abyss there's the eye of the hawk. All these things are lit, whereas upon the great sea, the master of the temple finds neither star nor moon, so there is no light. And I was about to answer him, the light is within me. But before I could frame these words, he answered me with a great word that is the key of the abyss. And he said, Thou hast entered the night. Dost thou yet lust for day? Sorrow is my name and affliction. I am girt about with tribulation. Here still hangs the crucified one, and here the mother weeps over the children that she hath not borne. Sterility is my name, and desolation. Intolerable is thine ache, and incurable thy wound. And I said, Let the darkness cover me, and behold, I am compassed about with the blackness that hath no name. O thou who hast cast down the light into the earth, so must thou do forever. And the light of the sun shall not shine upon thee, and the moon shall not lend thee of her lustre, and the stars shall be hidden, because thou art passed beyond these things, beyond the need of these things, beyond the desire of these things. And this is actually, it's going to be important to go on for one more paragraph, because in the body of the letter, Crowley refers to exactly this passage from 418 by just saying, Behold where thine angel had led thee. About a paragraph down, he carries on saying, Behold where thine angel hath led thee. Thou didst ask for fame, power, and pleasure, health, and wealth, and love, and strength, and length of days. Thou didst hold life with 8 tentacles like an octopus. Thou didst seek the 4 powers, and the 7 delights, and the 12 emancipations, and the 22 privileges, and the 49 manifestations, and lo, thou art become as one of these. Bowed are their backs whereupon resteth the universe. Veiled are their faces that have beheld the glory ineffable. These adepts seem like pyramids. Their hoods and robes are like pyramids. And the angel saith, Verily is the pyramid the temple of initiation. Verily also is it a tomb. Thinkest thou that there is life within the masters of the temple that sit hooded, encamped upon the sea? Verily, there is no life in them. So you can see the vividness, and this is not poetry, right? This is, he's doing magical work and doing visionary work and having these experiences, right? Out-of-body experiences. You might want to think of them as dreams provisionally. They're not, but he's actually there. So if you want to say, fear is failure and the forerunner of failure, and say that he says the Black Brother, he says, look at this passage, behold where thine angel hath led thee. Look at this passage and see, as soon as the adept realizes the program, as soon as the Black Brother realizes the program, maybe he dismisses his angel and runs in a different direction. And you can see why someone might panic when they realize the program, being come up against this degree of darkness and being told that the temple of initiation, verily it is also a tomb.
Yeah, when you were reading that, what stuck out to me was the passage, thou art passed beyond these things, beyond the need of these things, beyond the desire of these things.
Yeah, and I was wrong. This is not what it's like in the abyss. In the abyss is the eyes of the hawk. This darkness is the darkness of the great sea. This is success.
Yeah.
This is what success looks like.
This is when you're looking at success in the face.
And this is so great, right? Like, because what magicians want is expansion, right? They want greater cultural they want more what Keith 418, he calls it like cultural capital when he writes, right? They want more cultural capital. They want to be cooler with their friends. They want to pull more dames. They want more political power. They want, bigger hot tubs. and then gradually, hopefully, these aspirations become higher, become more refined. You pull more and more stuff down from the supernals, more and more inspirations, and you're working up higher and higher. And the idea of the self becomes bigger and bigger. And eventually, you find that your grandness, perhaps, is co-equal with the universe. There's a way that Vedic practitioners talk about this, saying that a Hindu saint You know, you just tell him the title of the book, and he can tell you the whole book. You know, The Phenomenology of the Spirit by Hegel. Let me tell you what Hegel would think about let me tell you what a guy named Hegel would think about the phenomenology of spirit, because their ability to understand terms is perfect, and their ability to do to understand conditions is perfect, so they can predict the whole every word of the book from a perfect understanding of the title. This is not exactly the same thing, right? But
it's funny because the first thing that comes to my mind is that seems like a preoccupation with knowledge.
Mm-hmm. But it's because of what he said. What said later on, right? Now that you're Nemo, all the answers to all the riddles that you've ever pondered will just come to you unrequested, because you have a direct connection to this inspiration. But it's not that you are a perfect model of the whole universe, but that you fully built a universe that's fully correct. You're in correct relationship with self, the universe, and everything. So.
Incidentally, I wouldn't mind defining. I know we've kind of avoided getting off on defining terms and whatnot, but Nemo is probably a worthwhile one to bring up, because it is the title, the name, so to speak, ironically, of the Master of the Temple. It actually means no one in Latin.
Oh, that's good. Thank you for saying that, because that's something I had forgotten long ago. It's the title of the Master of the Temple, frequently used, and we've mentioned it in the Occult episode too. The reason that I took the Oath of the Abyss was that I thought Master Therion needed Nemo in order to become a magus. So,
and maybe that'll give you some insight into Captain Nemo as well, who dips into the abyss himself.
Captain No One.
Yeah.
Oh yes. 10,000 leagues under the sea, 20,000 leagues. How many leagues under the sea?
Lots of leagues under the sea.
Justice leagues under the sea.
2 large alephs under the sea.
Whew, the League of Nations under the sea. I just thinking out loud while I think silently. Yeah, so it's not one of Crowley's magical names. It's a esoteric title for the grade of the Master of the Temple.
No one can do this. Nemo hoc facere potest. Well, that's one little passage from The Vision and the Voice at one point, where he's given a bow with a barbed arrow to shoot at a small child. And he says, I can't. He's basically, no one can do this. And the response is, Nemo hoc facere potest, which means Latin for no one can do this, and you are no one.
That's terrific. I can speak Latin too. Vastus lateralis, vastus medius, vastus intermedius, rectus femoris,
rectus barely nuus.
The least helpful Latin I could have possibly learned for dealing with occultism. I was both. Oh no, we got time. Do you want to pull a few more quotes out of these chapters on the vision and the voice, and see if we can explain what they mean?
Yeah. Did you have something you wanted to jump into, or shall I?
I have a few, but my hope is that we've done a good enough job of just defining terms.
Yeah.
Like, what is the abyss? What is the Master of the Temple? What is the Black Brother of the Left-Hand Path? And I thought we were going to need to go to the vision and the voice for elucidation, but we've been able to rap about it so much in a casual way that I think we've expressed our best understanding of the clear definitions, and also explained some of our confusions in ways that are helpful. So this is just going to be further defense of the thesis, but I don't need, I have probably 10 quotations marked out here to read, and we don't have to do all of them.
Gotcha.
So whatever the next thing, anything we read will be fun to talk about.
Okay, well, I was just looking down at the text and seeing the word Nemo spelt in all caps. And it also, this is lame, but it spells the word omen backwards. And there's a Latin phrase, Latin saying nomen est omen, which is to say the name is an omen itself. And apparently Nemo is an omen. But enough of that. I did want to read the very last portion in full because it's short and I think it was pertinent. But
Let's do it.
yeah, let's do it. So
We usually read out on those, but I agree. I think this is worth talking about. So reading out on it is not the best move.
And this is the meaning of the supper of the Passover, the spilling of the blood of the lamb, being a ritual of the dark brothers, for they have sealed up the pylon with blood, lest the angel of death should enter therein. Thus do they shut themselves off from the company of the saints. Thus do they keep themselves from compassion and from understanding. Accursed are they, for they shut up their blood in their heart. And I think this is why I wanted to read this, because it was like really what brought a lot of these ideas to mind that we've talked about. They keep themselves from the kisses of my mother Babylon. And in their lonely fortresses they pray to the false moon, and they bind themselves together with an oath, and with a great curse. And of their malice they conspire together, and they have power and mastery, and in their cauldrons do they brew the harsh wine of delusion, mingled with the poison of their selfishness. Thus they make war upon the Holy One, sending forth their delusion upon men, and upon everything that liveth, so that their false compassion is called compassion, and their false understanding is called understanding. For this is their most potent spell. Yet of their own poison do they perish, and in their lonely fortresses shall they be eaten up by time that hath cheated them to serve him, and by the mighty devil Choronzon, their master, whose name is the second death, for the blood that they have sprinkled on their pylon, that is a bar against the angel of death, is the key by which he entereth in.
And Crowley says, I think the trouble with these people was that they wanted to substitute the blood of someone else for their own blood because they wanted to keep their personalities. This is exactly the way we've been talking about it. And this was my preconception, and I'm glad to have it reified. Because it was dicey there whether or not I was going to end up being right about that. I've explained this to so many people. I did not want to discover that I was wrong.
Yeah. And incidentally, he does say they have been eaten up by time that hath cheated them to serve him. And time, incidentally, is Kronos, also known as Saturn, who is in Bina.
Yeah, great. So Bina being the Sephira that's right across the abyss, which is your landing pad if you make it across.
That's where the city of the pyramids is.
That's where, the darkest place of darkness with no stars and no moon that we just talked about. That's the great Bina, and the sphere of Saturn and Kronos. Kronos also is it Kronos who eats his own children except for Zeus, and then Zeus somehow smashes somebody out of the top of his head or something.
I think he's substituted for a rock that Kronos eats.
Man, that's so great and so apt and so appropriate. This is the point, right? Is the euphemism we use for, attaining no self and becoming no man is we sacrifice all our blood into the cup of Babylon, the Holy Grail, like Jesus, the cup that caught the blood of God, the saints and the martyrs and the masters of the temple. We all get to drain our blood into the Holy Grail, into the cup of Babylon. And here he's saying that the supper of Passover, marking your doorposts with the blood of the lamb so that the angel of death passes you over and only kills the firstborn sons of Egypt, not the firstborn sons of Israel. That this is actually gonna be the ritual of of the Black Brothers, because they, by being unable to confront the angel of death, they've, wanting to keep their identities, not wanting to sacrifice their own blood, they've failed in their abyssal crossing and become, and maybe this is the reason that no member of this generation actually makes it to Israel. They, it's a 3-day walk or something from Egypt to Israel, and they wander the desert for 40 years, and everyone dies, and their children get to Israel. Mm-hmm. And that's usually thought of as being because of the incident with the golden calf and stuff.
Yeah.
Or the flaming serpents, or whatever, all of the times that they were impious and betrayed their emancipator in favor of Canaanite deities. But the angels are saying, no, it's actually the Passover itself that's the problem. Mm-hmm. This is nice. In 7 pages, we get a condemnation of National Socialism and a whole new reason to be anti-Semitic. It's very, very helpful. Thank you.
That's sarcasm, incidentally.
No, I want to do an episode on 418 just focusing on the corrections he gives to interpretations of biblical verses, because every single one of those biblical verses has come up in my cult research. People like the Ku Klux Klan, or forgive me for mentioning these people in the same breath, they have the same ideas about this one thing. I'm not saying all Jehovah's Witnesses are Klan members, but again, the scriptural interpretation of these particular verses is the same, and certain other ones too. Basically, new religious movements in America tend to use a very specific 3 to 5 passages of the Old Testament as a justification for American slavery. And Liber 418 systematically corrects the interpretation of every single one of these verses by saying, no, this isn't about black people being enslaved by, yellow and white people. This is about the black, white, and yellow schools of magic or something, for example.
I didn't know about that coloring to it that these other groups brought to the table.
And so I didn't know either. And so it's wild that whenever the angels are doing biblical interpretation, they're specifically saying, no, this doesn't justify American slavery. This is about the 3 schools of magic. Mm-hmm. But also the supper of the Passover is just the ritual of the Black Brotherhood. It's like, you're looking for things that help. This bad politics, anytime you think you find a document that excuses the bad politics, more bad politics creep in. So,
it would be cool to explore some of those things for sure. And there's other things like the correction made in Liber 418 to the Lover's card, where they give the original layout of the card, so to speak. I mean, they literally say it's the original of it, but it's the brothers, and it's representing Cain and Abel.
Yeah, who are Mano and Yimo, who are twins who wandered in darkness for a long time, pre-existing gods, pre-existing Skyfather. What's his name? Peter, whatever. The father of this pre-existing Zeus, pre-existing Odin, pre-existing Zeus is a weird one because he's both the Sky Father and the Thunder Hero. They should be distinct. It should be Odin and Thor, but Zeus gets to be both because he's so cool. And then they're wandering around with this ox, and they get bored of being the only exigent beings in the void, and they agree that Yimo will need to be sacrificed to create the universe. And so Manu murders Yimo, gives his body to the Sky Father. The Sky Father creates the world.
And there we get Romulus and Remus.
And yeah, Romulus and Remus is another version of this story. There's versions of this story in I think in the Avesta, versions of this story in the Vedic scriptures. The Cain and Abel story is a version of this story. That's why Crowley says the story of the brothers is the story of Cain and Abel, the first murder, and is the story of the creation of the universe. And this is really neat when you look at the Proto-Indo-European work that's been done on this, because most of the versions of the reconstructed early story that's the hypothetical ancestor of all of these, first of all, the human people pre-exist the gods, so Deus ex homo, and then the universe is made out of a sacrificed man, the sacrificed twin. So microcosm, macrocosm, the tree of life is both the body and the universe. That's how that happens. And then weird things like the Yemo's hair is the grass, and the back of Yemo's head, his occipital bone is the moon, his mind is the sun, and the rest of his head is the night sky. And so when Nuit says things like, my incense is of resinous woods and gums, and there is no blood therein, because of my hair, the trees of eternity. You don't have to burn human sacrifices to me, because the human sacrifice has already been made. You know, my hair, the hair of my head, the night sky is Yemo's head, and his hair is the grass, the trees of my hair, the trees of eternity.
Interesting.
So, like, versions of this story have been published for a lot, because they exist in, like I said, in many different ancient cultures. But the Proto-Indo-European version of this story, I don't think was published until 1923, and then in German. So when Crowley publishes the Book of Thoth, it's likely that he's read this stuff. But when the Book of the Law is received, it's likely that he hasn't read this stuff. So when you see things in the holy books that seem to be explained by Proto-European mythology, it's
cool.
Yeah, it's neat. It's neat. The Book of the Law like predicts the discovery of the Proto-European myths and language.
More evidence.
And the people that are listed, if you Google this stuff, people that are listed as like great grandfathers of this line of research are Max Mueller, who Crowley recommends many of his books on the AA reading list, because he's the one that did all the translations of the great books of the East. J.G. Fraser and Max Mueller are both on the list of like the grandfathers of this kind of work. So holy smokes, that
cool stuff.
I've been trying to get that off my chest for a while. So just the fact that it just jumped into the middle of this.
Just walk around with that in your back pocket.
yeah, for months.
Well, you got another quote that you want to pull here?
Yeah, let's try to grab, I don't know, maybe one more.
Well, there is, before you jump into one, there's also that bit from, moreover, there is Mary, a blasphemy against Babylon, for she hath shut herself up, and therefore is she the queen of all those wicked devils that walk upon the earth, those that thou sawest, even as a little black specks that stained the heaven of Urania. And all these are the excrement of Choronzon.
Yeah, man.
Sorry.
Why is that better? You know, when in the genealogy of morals, Nietzsche complains about Jews for like 100 pages. And then he names his Jews Mary, Paul, and John. And he's like, these are the Jewish conspirators that overthrow aristocratic morality. And so it's all a criticism of Christianity. And the reason he keeps calling them Jews is just to annoy anti-Semites. Because he likes the Old Testament. He thinks it's vigorous and violent and all the, and
all the stuff he
all
likes.
the stuff he likes. That it has instincts built in. But like, when we say stuff that's like radically anti-Semitic, and then you go, no, I mean Christians. You apply exactly the same criticism to other groups of people. Everyone goes like, oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Christians are awful.
Yeah, it is kind of easy.
Yeah, you just
territory.
go like, as soon as you realize what Nietzsche's talking about, you forgive him for the entire thing.
Yeah, it's like, well, that's okay, because it's all right to hate those people.
Yeah, because those people are despicable.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing here. It's like, it's easy to see this as completely condemning Christianity, but I feel like it's easy to miss the point. thereby, because the point is that idea of restriction being the real sin, and that's really what's on trial here.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to nuance this a lot when we talk about the three schools of magic, because Crowley doesn't specifically say which school of magic Christianity belongs to, and it's nebulous whether it's white school or black school. I think probably black school. But in order to be a school of magic, you have to kind of escape Nietzsche's criticism of metaphysics as life denying. Like if you believe in an afterworld, afterworld literally,
a beyond place or whatever the term is.
If you believe in an afterworld, you're negating the value of your own life, and so that's the nuance here, is that like there's great Christian rituals, like the Eucharist is like becomes important for Thelemites at a certain point, and we can't talk about it on air. But the Eucharist becomes crazy important for Thelemites, and you end up reading not even like the secret book of John or any of the Gnostic texts, but like Gospels, right? Whereas here, it's this principle of life denial, probably, but also more explicitly, restriction, fear of experience, which is the Christian version of chastity. Thelemites have their own definition of the word chastity, but the Christian version of chastity, and we've talked about this before too, the difference between Thelemic purity doctrine and radical Christian purity doctrine, where one is a denial of large parts of existence, and one is the purity of pure existence.
Yeah, like the race purity twaddle.
So the race purity twaddle, but mostly to do with sex. Like, fear of sex or fear of everything worldly, fear of the body, fear of, this sort of stuff.
Anything carnal or supposedly bestial. And I guess it'll be really interesting to look at those three schools as well, because my instinct is that probably it's not easy to pigeonhole Christianity into just one place, because of the fact that it's easy enough to make a broad generalization, but that doesn't necessarily hold true in all cases anyway. So there's probably manifestations of any given religion that aren't necessarily pigeonholed. But anyway, that'll be an interesting subject to get into.
This is going to be our last quotation, I think, for the night. So let me read a long one. I'm going to sort of read us out here, but we won't go out. We'll talk about it a little bit.
It'll be the next 7 letters. You
know what? Stop me and start me, because this goes on, and if you have something that you want to say, it's best to interrupt me. Finally.
Okay, let's start with that. No, I'm sorry.
Yet must he that understandeth go forth unto the uttermost abyss, and there must he speak with him that is set above the fourfold terror, the prince of evil, even with Choronzon, the mighty devil that inhabiteth the outermost abyss. And none may speak with him or understandeth him but the servants of Babylon that understand, and they that are without understanding, his servants. So only 2 people have the power of interacting with the demon sea. You either have to be
those who understand, or those who do not understand,
who lack understanding. But but in their lack of understanding are his servants. The servants of knowledge, and we're not anti-science, but the servants of knowledge is an ultimate principle, right? The masters of temple and Black Brothers is what we're trying to say. But must he that understandeth go forth unto the outermost abyss, and there must he speak with him that is set over the fourfold terror. So this is not something that's avoidable. After a certain point on your path, it becomes inevitable that you. So you can, like we were saying earlier, this is saying that you. And this is a holy book, remember? AB, Class AB is not some nebulous place between Class A and Class B. That's not really either. It's fully a received holy teaching of Thelema and fully a work of holy scholarship. So this is a Class A document that, I mean, it doesn't mean we can't interpret it, but this isn't Crowley's interpretation. This is like, for a Thelemite, this is like the truth, right?
Yeah, this is
scriptural.
transmitted.
So it's not just, so when Crowley says it's not just a trance like Atma Darshana, Shiva Darshana, you have to perform a magical operation. That's from the scripture. That's right here. That he who understandeth must speak with the dove, and whoso passeth unto the outermost abyss, except that he be of them that understand, holdeth out his hands and boweth his neck unto the chains of Choronzon. If you are not a person with that understanding, a 7-4, a babe of the abyss, ready to go, then like the couple on the devil card, they hang their heads and they let themselves be chained. And as the devil, he walketh about the earth immortal, and beblasteth the flowers of the earth, and he corrupteth the flesh of the air, and he maketh poisonous the water, and the fire that is the friend of man, and the pledge of his aspiration, seeking that it mounteth ever upward as a pyramid, and seeing that man stole it in a hollow tube from heaven, even that fire he turneth into ruin, and madness, and fever, and destruction. And thou that art an heap of dry dust in the city of the pyramids must understand these things. The hollow tube, I think, is the phallus. And so he's... this is easy. He's corrupting all the elements by, your failure to cross into the realm of divine inspiration and to be connected with the source material of the universe is condemning you to live in sort of the corruption of your own making, or the corruption of the making of Choronzon, of the demon of dispersion.
Well, you could imagine somebody going through this process where if you are coterminous with the universe, then your insight carries some weight. But if you are completely cutting off even the smallest portion of the universe, that becomes massive. So it's like you're giving a corrupt point of view. I like the image. I've always liked the image of showing a point of view on a piece of paper by drawing a little V, and you're at the little apex of the V, or whatever the point is. And anything that's within those two prongs of the V you can see. And no matter how wide you make that V, unless it's just, the two arms go so wide that they collapse onto each other and there's no longer arms there and you're just seeing everything, anything less than that is cutting out big chunks. Right, so it's no matter what, and like if the universe is even approaching anything that seems infinite to us, the smallest portion becomes massive.
This is amusing because the V, the Roman numeral 5, the 5 of these makes up the pentagram, and the pentagram is the universal man, the proportions of the
and VVVVV was Crowley's moniker as the master of the temple.
Yeah, so if you and so the V, this perspective as man, like you're saying, the perspective of the man is a limited perspective until you open it out so much that it ceases to be a V, and so by opening up the perspective to absorb the full truth of the whole two-dimensional white page, now you're just bisecting it with a straight line, and you've sort of you don't have a letter V anymore. You have a straight line across a white page, and it becomes it destroys your conception of stops being the letter V. It destroys what you were trying to do, but embraces the whole page as a sort of sort of single diagram.
Hence, you could relate this idea to the Atma Darshana, the vision of Pan and the totality of the universe, and then beyond that, the Shiva Darshana, where you take that and destroy it.
Beware, therefore, O thou who hast appointed to understand the secrets of the outermost abyss, for in every abyss thou must assume the mask and form of the angel thereof. Hast thou a name, thou wert irrevocably lost. Search, therefore, if there be yet one drop of blood that is not gathered into the cup of Babylon the Beautiful. For in that little pile of dust, if there could be one drop of blood, it should be utterly corrupt. It should breed scorpions and vipers and the cat of slime. And I say unto the angel, is there not one appointed as warden? And he say, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Such an ecstasy of anguish racks me that I cannot give it voice. Yet I know it is but as the anguish of Gethsemane. So here's a couple of things. If you have a name, you're irrevocably lost. So this actually is maybe where I got my preconception about trances from, right? Because the name is sort of the centerpiece of the ruach upon which you build your whole personality, right? Like at the center of you-ness, there's your title, right?
Yeah.
And so in order to cross the abyss, all that stuff, you need to allow it to dissolve. So you're regarding, maybe not things in themselves, because you're still mediating it with your tools of perception, but you're not collating it as being like a piece of intellectual information. Right?
Yeah.
And so, and this is just what I was calling pratyahara, right? The removal of language from the conversation. So that's maybe why I was getting stressed out about it. But it's not that is the experience of crossing the abyss. It's that if you can't do that, then you're going to fail at your experience of crossing the abyss. That's the weapon, not the dragon, right?
And that Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani
Please.
is what Christ cried out on the cross. Lord, O Lord, why hast thou forsaken me?
Oh, I have a story about that too, but let's finish first. And yes, you know what Gethsemane is?
That okay, I'm just going off the top of my head, so I might be mistaken on this, but my assumption was that it was the mount on which Christ was crucified, but I could be wrong about that.
I think that's very good. I think it's the place, and again, I might be wrong. I looked it up, but only briefly. I think it's the place where he was prepared for crucifixion. So if he was whipped a bunch, if he had to build his own cross or whatever, if he was nailed or tied to a cross, or a post or whatever, if he had a crown of thorns pressed upon his head, and then he was encouraged. Then he was gently encouraged to make a solemn pilgrimage through town to the crucifixion site. Gethsemane would have been the place where at least some of that happened.
Gotcha.
And so, but the meaning is the same. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani were not Christ's last words.
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, I guess it depends on which.
Well, there's 4 gospels and 3 versions of of what he says on the cross. But even if you use this version, it's not a cry of despair. If I'm writing a short story about you, and I say Darren sang Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, would you imagine Darren going, Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen? Like you'd imagine him singing the song, right? Mm-hmm. Christ cried, O Father, why have you forsaken me? That's the first line of a psalm. And in this period, the psalms weren't numbered and were referred to by the first line. It's the title of a psalm he recites.
That's
and
really
the
cool.
psalm is about giving yourself up to the Lord. It's not about the Lord betraying you. That's where it starts.
That's incredible. I was always, There's a whole Martin Scorsese movie based on the idea.
But when people point to contradictions between the Gospels, there are some, I'm sure, but it doesn't necessarily say that this is the last thing he said. You know, he's up there for several days, and you can imagine him reciting mantras or singing praises or something. And so this is one of the praise songs he sings to the Lord as he's rotting in the sun.
That's really cool. And it reveals my some missing information in my biblical understanding, which is
I'm sure we all have missing information in biblical understanding. I'm sure there's a whole world of earnest Christians who just don't even think about it. I had a classics. Was it a classics professor or was it my modern Western Civ guy? Somebody at some point in my high school career, before I realized the Bible was a document a person could actually read, and I just spent a lot of time talking with people about what we had heard the Bible said. The classics professor told me that the 4 Gospels represented 4 separate stories about Christ, 4 complete tellings of the life of Christ, and he dies 4 times, and there are 3 different versions of his last words. And I was talking to my girlfriend at the time, who had been Baptist for her entire life, and said, no, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the beginning, the middle, the climax, and the denouement.
Yeah.
And if there were 4 different stories of the crucifixion, I'm sure I would have heard about it in Sunday school. Like, there's no, wow. It's one. The Bible is a narrative, and she was so cross with me for you heard one thing third hand from a high school teacher, and I've been a Christian my entire life.
Whoops.
But I was right, and that's really all I came here to say tonight. Yeah. Took me 2 hours to get it out, but I was right. Thanks very much, Darren. Do you feel satisfied with what we accomplished here?
Yeah, I feel pretty good about this. This is a great conversation, as always.
Okay.
Thanks for joining me again.
Yeah, thanks for everything.
Good to be back.
Love is the law, love under will.
Love is the law, love under will. Thanks for listening. Find us online at torontothelema.org. Watch for events on Meetup and the usual social media spots, and join us again in the darkly splendid abodes. Okay, let's keep this spontaneous ball off the ground.
Yeah. Rolling.
All right, so,
Going to Boomtown.
Going to Boomtown. Yeehaw. Yee-haw.